a single organ, 5 embryological sources, 4 cranial nerves, and one of the most confusing topics in embryology. But what if understanding the development of the tongue could actually be simple? Hi, I'm Dr. Divya Desa and welcome to ACE Anatomy's The Embryo Chronicles, where embryology becomes simple, visual, and unforgettable. In this video, we will unravel the fascinating journey of tongue from tiny lingual swellings in the floor of the primitive pharynx to a fully developed tongue while making complete sense of its anatomy, nerve supply, and high-yielding clinical correlations. So let's begin. Let's first start with the anatomy of the tongue briefly. So the tongue is a mucosa-covered muscular organ. So this is the dorsum of the tongue and it is divided into anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3. The anterior 2/3 is also called as the oral part of the tongue and the posterior 1/3 of the tongue is the pharyngeal part of the tongue. So at birth, both these anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3 will be located within the oral cavity itself. Later what happens is the posterior third of the tongue descends into the oropharynx and that happens by 4 years of age. So consequently in adults, the anterior 2/3 of the tongue is located in the oral cavity and the posterior part of the tongue is located in the oropharynx. Now this two portions, they are separated here by a V-shaped groove which we call it as the sulcus terminalis. And in front of the sulcus terminalis, we see this circumvallate papillae. And in the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, here we have a median furrow which we call it as the median sulcus. And over this surface here, the mucosa will contain the filiform and the fungiform papillae. When we look at the musculature of the tongue has two groups of muscles, the intrinsic and the extrinsic muscles. Now the intrinsic muscles have the origin and insertion within the tongue itself. So they are like arranged as the longitudinal, vertical and the transverse group of muscles. Whereas the extrinsic muscles will have origin elsewhere and they get inserted to the tongue. Like we have the palatoglossus originating from the palate and inserting to the tongue, then the hypoglossus from the hyoid bone, genioglossus from the genial tubercle and getting inserted to the tongue. Brief knowledge of the anatomy of tongue, let's begin with the development of the tongue. Now we learned that the tongue is a mucosa covered muscular organ. So it has the mucosa and it has the muscles. So the embryological source of origin also is different from this mucosa as well as from the muscles. So the mucosa develops from the endoderm of the pharyngeal arches, whereas the muscles, they develop from the occipital myotomes. Now let's study in detail how these are formed. Now let's look at the sources of development of the mucosa of the tongue. Now the tongue we know has two parts, the oral and the pharyngeal part. The oral part is the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So the anterior 2/3 of the tongue is formed from three swellings, that is a pair of lingual swellings and tuberculum impar in relation to the first arch. Whereas the pharyngeal part of the tongue is developed from the median swelling called as the hypobranchial eminence, which develops in relation to the second, third and the fourth arch. The muscles of the tongue, they are derived from the occipital myotomes. The hypobranchial eminence is further divided into a cranial part in relation to the second and third arches and a caudal part in relation to the fourth arch. Now let's see how these 5 endodermal swellings are going to form the mucosa of different parts of the tongue. So the pair of lingual swellings and the tuberculum impar is going to form the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. The cranial part of hypobranchial eminence, which develops in relation to the second and third arch, is going to form the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. And the caudal part of the hypobranchial eminence in relationship to the fourth arch will form the posterior most part of the tongue as well as the epiglottis. Now the two lateral lingual swellings outgrow the tuberculum impar and merge with each other to form the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. The line of fusion of these two lingual swellings in the median plane will form the median sulcus on the dorsal surface of the tongue. The tuberculum impar is not going to form any recognizable part of the tongue. Now, the hypobranchial eminence, which is otherwise also known as the cupola of Ease. So this develops in the floor of the primitive pharynx in relation to second, third and fourth arch. So here in relation to these three arches, we have the formation of the hypobranchial eminence. So once it divides into larger cranial part in relation to second and third branchial arch and a smaller caudal part, now this hypobranchial portion from the third arch will outgrow the second arch. So the second arch portion gets buried here and the third arch portion becomes more prominent. And the line of fusion of this anterior two-thirds and the posterior one-third here will be the sulcus terminalis. So this portion which is derived from this second and third arch, the hypobranchial portion which is derived from second and third arch is going to form the posterior one-third of the tongue, including the circumvallate papillae. That is very important because circumvallate papillae, you see it in front of sulcus terminalis, which is the line of fusion of anterior two-thirds and posterior one-third of the tongue. But it is developed from the hypobranchial eminence. Now here the portion of the hypobranchial eminence from the third arch will outgrow and fuse with the anterior two-thirds here. So the portion from the second arch gets buried here. And from the caudal portion, caudal part of the hypobranchial eminence, we will have the posterior most part of the tongue developing. So as the tongue develops from the floor of the mouth, the tongue is not separated from the floor. So it needs to be separated from the floor. So a sulcus develops between the developing mandibular process and the tongue, which we call it as the linguogingival sulcus. Now this linguogingival sulcus deepens further, separating the tongue from the floor of the mouth. And so the tongue becomes separated from the side, from the floor of the mouth. We have seen that the tongue develops, the mucosa of the tongue mainly develops from 5 different swellings, and we have the muscles developing from the occipital myotomes. Now the nerve supply also is different here. So it is very important to understand what is the nerve supply in relation to the embryological development. Now we have seen that the posterior one-third of the tongue, that is the pharyngeal part of the tongue, is developed from the cranial part of the hypobranchial eminence, which develops in relation to the second and third arch. Since the portion of the hypobranchial which comes from the third arch overpowers the second arch. So second arch is getting buried here, right? And we can see the third arch portion becoming more prominent here. So because of which, right, it is supplied, the posterior one-third is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. So it is supplied because glossopharyngeal nerve is the nerve of the third arch. So glossopharyngeal nerve takes over both the general sensations as well as special sensations of the posterior one-third of the tongue. Posterior most part of the tongue, it is developed from the caudal part of the hypobranchial eminence in relation to the fourth arch. So this forms the posterior most part of the tongue. So the nerve of the fourth arch is superior laryngeal nerve, and that supplies the posterior most part of the tongue. It is the branch of the vagus nerve. Now the anterior two-thirds of the tongue is developed from the first arch. Now the first arch, we have the mandibular nerve, which is the nerve of the first arch, and we have the chorda tympani nerve, which is the pre-traumatic nerve of the first arch. So because of which The general sensations are carried by the lingual branch of mandibular nerve, and the special sensations are carried by the chorda tympani nerve from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So thus, if you see the mucosa of the tongue, the 5th and 7th cranial nerve, that is the 5th and 7th cranial nerve. 5th is the trigeminal, mandibular nerve is the branch of trigeminal, and the lingual nerve specifically, which carries the general sensations, is a branch of this mandibular nerve. So here the 5th nerve is taking care of the general sensations, and the 7th is taking care of the special sensations. So chorda tympani nerve is a branch of the facial nerve, and it is the pre-traumatic branch of the first arch. Whereas if you take the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, it is the 9th cranial nerve which is taking care there. Okay, so it takes care of both the general as well as the special sensations. Whereas the posterior most part is taken care by the 10th cranial nerve, that is the vagus, through its superior laryngeal branch. Coming to the nerve supply of the muscles of the tongue, since the muscles of the tongue are derived from the occipital myotomes, okay, they are all supplied by the hypoglossal nerve. So as these occipital myotomes, okay, so the myoblasts from here, they migrate into the developing tongue from these occipital myotomes. So as they migrate, the hypoglossal nerve, which is the nerve of these occipital myotomes, accompanies the myoblasts and during their migration and innervates them as they develop. So here you have to remember that this hypoglossal nerve supplies all the muscles of the tongue except for palatoglossus. So palatoglossus is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve branch from the vagus. So this one muscle is not supplied by the hypoglossal nerve. Let's see what happens if some abnormality happens during the development, okay, which results in some of the congenital abnormalities. So the first condition here we'll study is the aglossia. So aglossia means absence of tongue. So it's a very rare condition and it occurs due to complete agenesis of the tongue primoria. So we know that tongue develops from the lingual swellings, right? Lingual swellings, hypobranchial eminence. So if these fail to form, okay, and that results in what we call as aglossia. Sometimes we may also see another condition known as hemiglossia or half tongue. It is basically due to the absence of one of the lingual swellings. Okay, so when one of the lingual swellings they fail to develop, it will result in hemiglossia. The next condition is bifid tongue. So in this condition, the anterior portion of the tongue splits into two parts. So it is caused by the failure of fusion of the two lingual swellings. So we know that anterior 2/3 of the tongue is developed from a pair of lingual swellings and they fuse. That's why we have the median sulcus in the center. That is the line of fusion of the two lingual swellings. So when it fails to fuse, it results in this bifid tongue. The condition which we commonly see is the ankyloglossia. Ankyloglossia is otherwise commonly called as the tongue tie. So it occurs when the frenulum of the tongue extends to the tip of the tongue. So it will prevent the protrusion of the tongue and causes difficulty in speech. So sometimes the tongue can be also adherent to the palate, which we call it as the ankyloglossia superior. The next condition is lingual thyroid. Now this lingual thyroid is a clinical condition in which the thyroid tissue is present in the tongue. So why does this happen? That is because here there is persistence of the foramen cecum. So foramen cecum we will see at the sulcus terminalis in the center. So that is the primordia for the development of the thyroglossal duct which forms the thyroid gland. So if there is persistence of this foramen cecum, it results in lingual thyroid. So we will see this lingual thyroid either under the mucosa or within the muscles of the tongue. The other anomalies which we see usually associated with other syndromes is basically the macroglossia, where there is a large tongue, and microglossia, where the tongue is too small. So these are some of the embryological abnormalities or the developmental anomalies which occurs in the development of the tongue. If this video helped simplify the development of the tongue, please like, share and subscribe to ACE Anatomy. Leave your questions in the comments and let me know which embryology topic you would like to learn next. So thank you for learning with ACE Anatomy. Don't just memorize anatomy, understand it, visualize it and apply it. Because when concepts are clear, success follows. See you in the next video.